So, let's see. Welcome to week 7. So, just to comment on what I've been reading so far about your assignments. I generally like what I see in your biopsychosocial recons. People are tending to overthink and stress about them. It's actually pretty simple. If you're in the field, then it's basically a narrative of the ASAM criteria, and if you haven't learned that yet, we will be. Either later today or later this week. But basically, just to recap, biological is what's happening with the drugs, physically, what drugs they're taking. Psycho is what's happening emotionally. And psychologically, social is what's happening in their immediate lives and social structure. And you just write a narrative, 4 to 5 pages. Pretty straightforward, okay? So if you want more specific feedback, email me. About three or four people have actually kind of gone overboard on the storytelling. This isn't about storytelling, it's about trying to having a framework so that you can help people. So if you use yourself as a subject, are you sure what you are doing is optimal for your client? That is the reason I started drawing this piece in here, is you might not be able to see outside your box, to see what the problem is. And when you're using yourself as a subject, you can definitely accurately do a good, shall we say, an autobiographical narrative, but you might not necessarily be able to look at outside of your particular circumstances to explain what's happening to you. So, in terms of looking at TX treatment methodology and goals, the process is the goal. That is, whatever happens in your interaction, you want them to be able to explore more and more of what's going on with them than they would on their own personal reflection. So whatever happens in the process of simply questioning them, getting them to reflect in as many ways as you can to do that. So for example, when somebody has a week or 2 or less than a week, so what you want to get them to is that first week and get them to note what's going on for them in that week of not using whatever that is. That's why you were doing that personal addictive inventory. For example, what is it like for you to go a week without media, if you can do that, or a week without sugar, or whatever it is. So the process itself is the goal. So recovery, as we were talking about the other day, is a spiraling process, not necessarily a destination. So the method, whatever method you use, has to instill the skills to support client-centered recovery. So in other words, with that, it's not what's wrong with them, but what healing needs to occur because of what happened to them. So for example, if somebody's relationship basically got trashed because of their use, and now their ex is hooked up with somebody else, you're going to basically be dealing with a relationship breakup, having to co-parent, not having to use, to deal with the angry text back and forth and all those other kinds of stuff. The process is the material. The life is the material. So basically, that's one of the things that, in terms of looking at the ground, anything can be used in the process of self-transformation. It's like their life is like an algebra lesson or a math lesson. You know, the annoying thing in math where you have to basically keep writing the same problems over and over and over again until it becomes reflexive. Life is like that. Life is algebra. All right, so in your biopsychosocials, you generally followed that. I saw mostly that happening. So what I saw was good. So good. Continue. So when we start looking at going into what some of the stuff that I'll be showing in terms of neurochemistry is basically somewhere less than 30 years old. So physically and mentally, we've seen the physical neurochemical reasons for addiction within the brain. Let's say there might be a natural balance created by the DNA code, but the DNA code itself is not fixed and static. It is changing. Different parts of it are shutting on and off basically in response to signal from the environment, and that signal is happening on multiple different levels. So that balance will get changed with exposure to chemicals or other environmental pressures, including energy, including thought, including diet, medical procedures, all kinds of things. So we looked at using the idea of the brain is kind of like a computer, the hardware of the brain. Now, we also look at the software of the mind. Now, part of how the software and the hardware interact is that they are interrelated. Basically, when you take a drug, you are altering your neurochemistry, and your drug effect is, especially if it's a psychoactive drug, it's your body and your mind's reaction to the presence of that chemical. In one sense, you could think of, well, if you learned how to modify your own neurochemical balance, you wouldn't need the drug. But we aren't necessarily taught how to do that. Or we're being Americans into convenience. So it's easier to do a cup of coffee than to take a walk around the block. All right, so I want to give you a concept of limbic resonance. Anybody heard of that before? All right.
Limbic system.
Yes, limbic system, seat of the emotions. I will be looking at the four brains concept, limbic resonance. Where I first learned about this about 4 or 5 years ago, and the data is basically starting around year 2000, roughly. The idea was that as mandatory reporters, we know we're supposed to report if a child is witnessing domestic violence, right? Not so much that the kid is going to be a target of the violence, which is possible, but that the kid is emotionally affected by the violence. Now, even if there is no physical violence, the kid can pick up on what's going on emotionally. And so this is called limbic resonance. Now, it's not telepathy, though, if you want to go there, you could go there, but the idea is this. Concept of empathic harmony, that is, when something resonates with something else, it doesn't have to be the same frequency. It could be a complementary frequency. Much like if you were talking about a musical note, as I do, so if you visualize, as a musician, a piano keyboard, the strongest psychological relationship is the tonic and the dominant. That is, if we're talking about C to G. That's the strongest relationship. And then the third, the major third, so E, C, E, and G, which makes a major triad. So when you're talking about 12-bar blues, all right? So C to G to F to G back to C, right? Strong relationships, resonant, right? So limbic resonance, like music, concept of empathic harmony arising from the limbic system of the brain. First advance in the book, A General Theory of Love. It refers to the capacity for empathy and nonverbal connection that's present in animals, and that forms the basis of our social connection, as well as the foundation for various modes of therapy and healing. This is partially when we're talking about a counselor has to be empathetic. Okay? It's quite frequent that if you are aware of what's going on with yourself and all of a sudden you feel something that isn't you, but the client is probably going through that. Particularly if you develop a relationship of trust, then you will start to resonate with what's going on with them. Similar to what's going on with you. So while we talk about you do not have to be a junkie to help junkies. You just have to understand what they're going through without having to go through it yourself. And you have to be able to walk them through it. So part of limbic resonance, it's a tool that's in our counselor toolbox that's basically a function of being human, where children will pick up on the tension between their parents without the parents saying a word. Because the kids basically don't know what the boundaries are and why are mom and dad mad at each other. What's going on here? All right, so according to those authors, at UCSF, our nervous systems are not self-contained, but rather demonstrably attuned to those around us with whom we share a close connection. In their terms, within the effulgence of their new brain, mammals developed a capacity we call limbic resonance, a symphony of mutual exchange and internal adaptation whereby two mammals become attuned to each other's inner states. Now, what they're talking about, obviously, the worldview of science, where I have an app on my iPad, maybe I'll show it to you at some time. Basically, it's called Back in Time. It compresses, sorry for you Christians, but, okay, there are many of us that believe that the world is older than 5,000 years old. So the worldview of the science, the culture that generated this class, right? We're like 15 billion years old. So this app basically compresses 15 billion years into a 24-hour cycle on a clock and shows you with graphics. So if you understand, human beings have only been around for the last 30 seconds in a 24-hour clock. So when he's saying relatively recent, it's nothing. 200,000 years is nothing compared to the Earth and everything else. So when you're talking about the effulgence of their new brain, our new brain has basically exploded on the scene, in terms of, from our anthropocentric, that is human-centered point of view. Limbic resonance. So, builds on previous formulations and similar ideas. The example, they tell notorious experiments of Harlow, establishing the importance of physical contact and affection in social and cognitive development of rhesus monkeys. That is, the monkeys that got touched and had displays of affection were mentally healthier than the ones who had not. Mother-infant contact, and then the triune brain, which we're actually going to talk about that. Reptilian, limbic, and neocortex. So empathic resonance is also referred to. Empathy and mental illness. So exactly, one of the things that we find disturbing, particularly in mass murders or mass shootings or whatever, when we say somebody is snapped, I have my own feelings about what normal is, but if we say that somebody is mentally ill, it's because they don't have empathy with other human beings. That empathy is somehow lacking. So, heart of mammalian development, limbic regulation, and social organization. Limbic regulation means, can you regulate your emotions and empathize with others? Can you do that? So, using functional MRI, that is, you're able to analyze the electrical signals of the brain in real time and image them. So we understand the feelings of others via mechanisms of action representing the representation of action representation. That is, when you represent something, you're basically building a story, a simulation in your own mind. So this kind of talks about, later on in this work, they talk about mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are basically the neurons that you use internally to be able to create a simulation about what's going on with somebody else and be able to empathically relate with them. Yeah, question?
I just read something about how mirror neurons fire most often with people of your same culture and not so much of people of a different culture that you can relate to. Do they talk about that?
This hasn't, but I can tell you by experience. Give you a couple of words. Xeno means alien. Okay? So when you're xenophobic, that means you fear aliens. Fear that which is different, right? If you're xenophilic, okay, that means you love aliens. Or you're curious about them, or, you know, it's not dangerous to you, right? So you seek out, well, that's interesting, that's new, that's different. And so in terms of curiosity, you're willing to look at and learn about differences and be attracted to them.
And have they found like a biological difference in these two types of people, or are these just two different behaviors, or are they like personality types?
The way I could answer that is the field that probably is most xenophilic is anthropology. Okay? You can actually look at xenophobia in terms of some aspects of cognitive psychology, because within cognitive psych, the whole thing about stereotypes, what stereotypes are, they come from structures in the brain, but they're quick answers without thinking. Because you need to make snap decisions sometimes for survival. You don't want to overthink certain things. So you just see, often in diversity work, we basically, when people say, I don't see color. Well, wait, stop. Yes, you do. Because you can also see what gender expression somebody is instant. That's the first thing you notice. If what you're trying to say is, you try not to assign negative value to somebody that's different than you, okay, but don't tell me you don't see color or gender, because you do. Because you're uncomfortable when somebody's on the line where you can't tell what or who that you're something. Right? That's why we don't like cross-dressing. That is, we as a generic heteronormative society. Right? So, xenophilic, loves aliens, or xenophobic, afraid of what's strange. So, in terms of when we're looking at within this field, that's why I had, as part of the exercise, had you make you think about who would be the difficult client for you to deal with. Because I've said, sometime in your career, you're going to meet you as a client. What's that going to be like for you? Right? So sometimes familiarity breeds contempt, like, I really know this, and unless you come clean with yourself, I'm not going to trust you. Or somebody who expresses political views that you find difficult or problematic. Same thing. You don't necessarily, in limbic resonance, you don't necessarily have to agree with the sentiment. You don't. You just have to understand where they're coming from. Would I believe the way they believe if I'd gone through the same experiences? Yeah, probably. There, but for the grace of God go I. Right? Basically, limbic resonance, where you're basically looking at somebody way different than you. So, link between mirror neurons and limbic systems. So, mirror neurons areas seem to monitor this interdependence, this intimacy, this sense of collective agency that comes out of social interactions, and that is tightly linked to the ability to form empathic resonance. So the work that's been done in neuroscience that gets to your question is tricky. Might not happen within it because you have to find a physiological basis and then be able to conceive it to ask questions to do that design. But yeah, good question. The only time that I've even seen that question posed is in anthro. And that's why, I got into the whole cultural thing, mostly because of, an ethnic minority. All right? Your psychology is not matching my experience. How do I negotiate that? So, limbic resonance and limbic regulation are also referred to as mood contagion or emotional contagion. So, a contagion is often thought of in epidemiological terms in terms of something is spreading. Like an emotional state is spreading. And then limbic regulation would have to do with, can you control your emotions? Can you shut them down? Like, for example, anybody seen Firefly? Okay. There's a science fiction series called Firefly, and the movie length was called Serenity. And so there's a character in there who had surgery done on her brain so that she experienced all her emotions directly and the emotions of others directly, and she was unable to regulate them. And the goal was to essentially make her a telepathic assassin. So she could literally read minds. But also, she had problems regulating her own emotions because she's feeling all the emotions of everybody else without any shielding, without any ability to shut it down. And so, for example, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala. So you're scared. You don't want to be scared. So you push it away. And it's the amygdala that allows you to push it away. So when they're talking about limbic regulation, so when somebody says that they have, for example, a condition like ADHD, ADHD does not mean you can't, in an educational context, because that's what we're often talking about when we deal with it here, it doesn't mean that you can't learn. It means that you have difficulty with a type of learning that means sitting down and sitting still during a lecture when you're pissed off for something else. And you focus on the being pissed off, and you don't focus on what's going on in class. And so what you don't necessarily learn to do is like regulate your being pissed off so that you can get the class work done or focus. All right, so limbic resonance, all right, you're feeling what somebody else is feeling. Limbic regulation is you're able to control what you are feeling. So when it talks about mood contagion, are you in the presence? If you're in the presence of somebody who's angry, do you get angry? Or why am I getting angry? Why am I getting angry? I'm getting angry for them. Can you separate that, right? Should I make this more real?
Yes.
Okay. I really, really dislike sex offenders. Okay? Many of the women I've been involved with personally are survivors of sexual abuse. So I feel rage, not at her, but because of somebody who did something to her that I get to experience, right? And I've had to treat sex offenders. Big thing, right? You did that, I have to control my rage, right? And also dealing with, my partners in the past and essentially Right. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at those people that did that to you. And then she doesn't want me to feel, hey, look, I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at those people. How can I, not empathize with you? But I still have now all this rage, right? So I'm not angry at you, and I don't want you to be angry or scared, no, because that could be a trigger, right? Because if they were abused and there was physical abuse, anger and go together, right? So I have to regulate, okay, need to walk this off, need to meditate, right? Do something else, right? So you have to look at, when you're in the field, not projecting that on clients so you can help them with their thing. And that's part of what being non-judgmental means. Not that you don't have the judgments, but you're aware of your judgments and that you can kind of work around them to a certain degree. Jack Kornfield uses the musical metaphor of the original definition of limbic resonance, correlates these findings of Western psychology with the tenets of Buddhism. Each time we meet another human being and honor their dignity, we help those around us. Their hearts resonate with ours in exactly the same way the strings of an unplugged violin vibrate with the sounds of a violin played nearby, or a harp or a guitar, or whatever. Western psychology has documented this phenomenon of mood contagion or limbic resonance. If a person is filled with panic or hatred walks into a room, we feel it immediately, and unless we're very mindful, that person's negative state will begin to overtake our own. When a joyfully expressive person walks into a room, we can feel that state as well. All right, so limbic resonance. Now, early on in that work, they talked about the triune brain. I'm going to talk about a quaternary brain. So instead of 3, 4 brains. So lizard brain, mammal brain, human brain, and angel brain. So this is your brain. Forget about the skillet. We're not frying. It's not your brain on drugs. Right? So basically we're talking about the oldest parts of the brain, brainstem and cerebellum. Then we will get into the limbic system and the cortices and the prefrontal cortex. So, lizard brain. So the reptilian brain. I like to think of it in terms of the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. Can I eat it? Will it eat me? Can I copulate with it? That is, can I eat it? Approach pleasure. Will it eat me? Fear and flee pain. Can I copulate with it? Repeat pleasure. So it's reflex without thinking and addictive behavior. So this is one of the oldest parts of the brain that basically evolved to deal with quick threats. You don't think. And this is in terms of when we talk about lizard brain. In addiction, this is one of the things that when you get the off-the-wall thought of maybe I should use, even if you've been a long time in recovery, this is where it's coming from. And so your ability to regulate, oh, shut up, I don't want to use. That's not even on the option. But this is one of the things that's often difficult for people in early recovery. So, for example, if you look at many times our behavior patterns with things like money, impulse buying, that's basically playing in with lizard brain. So, what do you fear? How do you act reflexively out of fear? Now, the limbic system, the mammal brain. So if you understand how limbic resonance works, this works really good for creating a herd instinct, right? You're addictive, in terms of addiction, it's your addictive using peer group. So gambling, shopping, spending, debting, these are all things that happen in relationship to a group, in comparison with a group. in a group setting. One of your social recons talked about a person who was gambling at Three Rivers, if I recall correctly. So kept feeding a stack of 20s and a nickel slot. Finally ran out of cash, then fed their ATM card, more, boom, they hit the jackpot of $175. And then that person said, yeah, well, that's less than half of what I've spent. Okay, so you just like spent $300-400 on this? Okay. Yeah, you gamble with money you have to throw away. If you don't have money to throw away, don't gamble, which is easier than it sounds. But mammal brain, your addictive peer using group. So it's brain 2, that is the limbic system, wrapped around brain 1, or the old lizard brain. So typical animals for dogs, cats, the herd instinct. You have the sheep racing with the sheep, herd instinct. Who do I run with?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that where the mirror neurons are?
I think so, though I'm thinking some of them are in the neocortex too. So neocortex, that is the new brain, the new body. So the neocortex gives us rational thought. So for example, with money, how much of our thought is actually rational? Do we think it out, particularly within gambling? So neocortex essentially gives us rationalization of addictive behavior. I can stop anytime. So basically so the typical animals, just like lizard brain was lizards, animals, the mammal brain was lower mammals, the neocortex is primates, humans included. And there's a reason why I have two different, besides the thinker and the two images on the left side, you have chimpanzees, and the right side you have bonobos. Now, humans and chimpanzees, humans, chimpanzees and bonobos basically match our DNA genome by 98%. That is, in order to become human, there's a 2% difference between these two creatures and us. And we have within ourselves 98% of their genome. So when they were doing studies about aggression, they were studying chimpanzees, and then they found a subset of things that look like chimpanzees called bonobos that actually use sex as a conflict resolution. And they're not heteronormative either. So you could basically look at, there's some interesting stuff that comes out of the research that, studies bonobos and tries to translate it to humans, and I'm not sure that we have evolved the type of societies especially in the 21st century within our context that can really use this stuff, but there it is. Yeah.
Are they more closely related to men than women?
It's hard to say, because here's what their societies are. Where chimps have alpha males, bonobos have alpha females, and the alpha females are not necessarily monogamous. And the sexual contact can be 30 seconds, and it's not necessarily about, they have heterosexual when, one of the females is for sex, for procreation, when one of the females is ovulating, but they can have like 30 sexual encounters a day, where it could be as short as 30 seconds or minutes, and it's basically used as for conflict resolution. All kinds of conflict, and to basically ensure compliance with the females who are leading the tribe. And it's basically female dominant. So, good question, interesting. Then, angel brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. So the basic activity of this particular brain region considered to be orchestration of thoughts and actions in accordance with internal goals. The most typical neurologic term for these functions carried out by the prefrontal cortex is executive function. So the idea behind, for example, the money assignment was an exercise to develop executive function. So executive function means that it can override all the other brains. And this is the last part of the brain to develop. Starts at about 15 years old and ends at about 22. Starts earlier in females. So executive function relates to the ability to differentiate, that is, tell the difference between conflicting thoughts, determining good or bad, better and best, same and different, future consequences of current activities, working towards a defined goal, prediction of outcomes, expectation based on actions, and